There are 4 new features added to the Quilt Calculator, the quiltnotes.com website this week, and I'll show them to you now. The first one is, if you want to know the new updates since the last time you'd been to the website, if you look on the sidebar over here, you see website timeline. So we'll click on that, and then for this week, the updated design or size of quilt with new features. Then we have the Ohio Star block for rotary cutting and for AccuQuilt. And for AccuQuilt, we have the Winding Ways quilt. And then for rotary cutting, AccuQuilt, or paper piecing, we have the Tilted Charms quilt. So let's look at the updated design or size of quilt first. And this tells you what the features are. So we'll click on this. And here is the new, where the updated features are. These updates were suggested by some viewers, and the first one is a sashing without cornerstones, and this is what it looks like. You basically have another sashing put between the rows of blocks. So in this case, the blue sashing is the horizontal sashing, and the yellow sashing is the vertical sashing between the blocks. So you'll get this calculation in addition to all the other results. The second thing was we added 108-inch backing fabric to the backing fabric calculations. So let's look at the new functions that were added on here. So as usual, you enter the block size first. We'll say 12 inches wide by 12 inches long. And the number of blocks across, let's put 5. And you can use these arrows up and down here to change if you want to do it a little bit faster. And for down, let's put about 7. So 4 across and 7 down. And we'll need to put a sash width in here. Let's put 2 inches. And let's leave the border off for now. So if you'll see now, you have your results down here. This is the quilt width and length with the new sashing added. The number of blocks is 28. Here's the binding fabric calculation, and it looks like I'll have to fix this, but this is the sashing without cornerstones. So you'll need 68 inches or 1.89 yards, and I'll need to fix that for you. So the horizontal sashing, this is what you cut. You'll need 30 inches or 0.83 yards. You'll cut 12 strips at 2.5 inches times the width of fabric. And this is designed so you sew those horizontal sashings together. Then when you put your quilt top together, you'll just measure the width of the quilt top and you'll know how long to cut these horizontal sashings. And then here is the vertical sashing. These are the sashings between the blocks. Then if you do want cornerstones, you have this section down here, sashing with cornerstones. There's the total yards for the sashing and for the cornerstone. Then we have the borders, crosswise cuts and lengthwise cuts, but we didn't put a border on this example. Here's the backing fabric now, and here's the how much you need for 45-inch wide, and here is how much you need for 108-inch wide. So that's the new additions or new features added to the design/size of quilt. All right, so that is fixed now. It looks better. The next thing we're going to look at is the Ohio Star quilt block. If I can go back to my website timeline, we'll press that again. So here is the Ohio Star quilt block, and this is for rotary cutting and for AccuQuilt. So we'll click on this link. Here is the Ohio Star block, and it is used 4 fabrics. And this just gives you some information about it. Here's my Pinterest board. You can look at more variations. It tells you how the block is constructed, that it's a 3x3 grid. So if you want to make the block larger or smaller, it tells you how to do that. And then here is the block diagram, and these are the patches. So A1 is patch A, and 1 is the fabric. So A is the patch, and 1 is the fabric. Here is B1, B is the patch, and 1 is the fabric. So you see there's fabric 1, fabric 3, fabric 4, and fabric 2 are all on this quilt block, and it will separate out the fabrics in the results. And this just tells you the different sizes that are on the calculator. So the unit finished size, which is either the square or the quarter square triangle, is listed here. And here's the block finished size. So if you wanted to make a bigger block, these are the units you would put in this 3x3 grid. Okay, so we go down here, and this talks about rotary cutting, and it tells you how to make the quarter square triangles 4 at a time. This calculator for rotary cutting is based on that method of making 4 at a time, and here is the video that shows you how to do that. Here's the AccuQuilt cutting, and here is the chart, different sizes of the units and the dies that you would use for that. And these are the dies that I used for calculating the AccuQuilt block. If you have the Ohio Star block on board, this is what it looks like. And if you're using that, you just choose the 12-inch finished size on the calculator, and that will give you how much fabric you need if you have the block on board. So this tells you need to first go to Design a Quilt to see how many blocks you need, and then you can come back to this calculator. So this is just a swatch chart of the different fabrics, and then the diagram is repeated again in case you want to just copy these results along with that. So here's the Ohio Star Quilt Block Calculator. If you're using AccuQuilt, you select this. If you're not using AccuQuilt, you leave it blank. So then you'll choose your block size. So let's do a 9-inch block size, and how many blocks do you need? Let's say 35 blocks. So here are your results for each fabric. Here's fabric 1. You need a total of 105 inches, or a little over 1 1/4 yards. This tells you patch A, which is the square. And if you go up here, you'll see this is patch A, and it's a square. Patch B is a quarter square triangle. So we'll just continue down here and look again. Here's patch A and the fabric you need for patch A, patch B, and the fabric you need for patch B. Then it goes on to fabric 2, how much you need for patch A, which is another square. This is fabric 3 and fabric 4. And these are also for the quarter square triangle patch. And so if you're doing AccuQuilt, you'll just press on this, and if you're doing the block on board, you'll click the 12-inch finished block, and however many blocks you need, if you want to change that, you can. And it will give you the same patches and fabrics. All right, so now the next one is called Winding Ways, and this is for AccuQuilt only. So let's go back to our website timeline, and here is AccuQuilt Winding Ways quilt, and we'll click on this link. You can also get this by coming up to AccuQuilt. Let me just show you that. So here's AccuQuilt, and here are the calculators we have for AccuQuilt. So here's Winding Ways, here's the Ohio Star block on board, and you can get the other ones from this Quilts tab, and it has, here is the Ohio Star and the other 2 quilts. So let's go back to AccuQuilt and click on Winding Ways. Now this takes it directly from the block on board for Winding Ways. Here's a picture of the quilt I made, and I made this a few years ago, so I don't have the quilt anymore. Here is the AccuQuilt block on board for the Winding Ways. And this video is very detailed, showing you how to piece these little curves. And they're very easy, and the video is very detailed. It's a very good instruction of piecing curves. So this tells you you'll need to go to the Design a Quilt to see how many blocks you need. And this is an 8-inch finished block. So instead of putting 12 like we normally do in the block width and length, you'll put 8 because it's an 8-inch finished block. And then we'll just go down here and just put the number of blocks. So let's say we need 35 blocks. This tells you how much light fabric to buy and how to cut it. And this tells you dark fabric, you need the same amount as the light fabric. So that is the Winding Ways block on board. And the final one we have And we can go to the website timeline, but we'll go over here under quilts. And this is called Tilted Charms Quilt. This is for rotary cutting, for AccuQuilt, and also for paper piecing. So we'll click on this. Here's a diagram of the full quilt, and this tells you about the quilt. Here is a diagram of the block. This is a 12-inch finished block. So you'll use that in your quilt, design a quilt and size a quilt. This tells you a little bit of history of what we have on the Tilted Charms. This was part of Block of the Day, so it is 0910, and it just shows block information. Here you can download the Tilted Charms updated instructions. This is for rotary cutting, and these are some of the tools I use for this block. A rotating cutting mat is very handy, as well as the 6.5-inch square ruler, because these units in this block will be trimmed down to 6.5 inches. Here is for AccuQuilt cutting. Here are some dies you can use. For paper piecing, you'll have the paper piecing foundations will be in the download from up here. They'll be in this download. And so then how many blocks? You'll go to your Design a Quilt calculator. You'll put in 12 inches for the finished block size. So here you just choose your piecing method, and you have rotary cutting, AccuQuilt, or paper piecing. Let's do paper piecing. The number of blocks, let's say we need 40 blocks. This tells you for the charm fabric, you can use charm squares if they're already cut, but if you need to cut them, this is how much fabric you'll need. And this tells you how many squares you need. If you just have the charm squares, you'll need 160 squares for this quilt. This is a pretty large quilt. And here is the frame fabric. It tells you how many you need. And then at the bottom, it will tell you how many of the rectangles to cut in one direction and how many rectangles to cut in the other direction. And you'll see that in the instructions, and you'll see that in the video up here as well. So that's the new things we have for this week. I hope you'll check them out and bookmark them for later, and we'll see you next time at quiltnotes.com.